Hey, I'm talking to Andrei, the founder of Siena AI. Thank you so much, Andrei, for joining us.
Thanks for the invite. I'm excited for the chat.
All right, so why don't we start off in the beginning? What's your
Well, the story starts in Romania
great country?
about 20 years ago, where growing up, I wanted to find ways to just buy stuff for myself. I was very into computers since I have a computer thanks to my dad since I was 3, which was very surprising for Romania. We don't have a lot of people in the early 90s having computers at the age 3, but I was lucky enough to have one. And since then, I was always like playing on computers, finding different things to do on the computer. So I grew up with a computer. And
Were
then when
you
I was,
playing at the computer as a 3-year-old?
yeah, I have a picture of it. It's like very deep into it.
What kind
There
of
was
stuff were you
some,
doing?
there was a Prince of Persia. I think it was the game, like 2D game, the very, very exciting. And there were some like Disney Mickey Mouse games. Then we had Hercules coming up in like, I don't know, 97, I guess. So all those like early games, I still remember some of them. Really fun times. Yeah. So I started having access to a computer since I was a kid. And I was just in love with the fact that you have this machine. And at that point in time, you're buying CDs, right? Like you're buying or copying CDs and you were sharing with your friends different games. And at some point, as I was maybe 10 or 12, I realized that this is fun. I like my family's computer, but I actually want to buy a computer for myself. I didn't have any money, of course. And growing up in Romania in early 2000s it's not a country where you necessarily have a lot of opportunities. There are opportunities, but they're not somewhere in the US or in like the Western world.
Why don't we take a quick step back and talk
Sure.
about what was the story with Romania and communism? Like, what was going on back then from a political standpoint? Why
Yeah,
didn't we
so
have computers?
it took me a while to figure this out. When you grow up as a kid there, you think everything like it's just there. It's like that's the world that you live in. And that was the world that I grew up in. So little that I know, I grew up early 90s, and little that I know, Romania was just transitioning from being a communist state to being a democratic state, part of Europe. And when that transition happened, the power basically went from the government or the Ceausescu who was running the show to now various politicians and various people that were able to gain different assets, flip them, and you have a group of people that are really, really wealthy because they flipped different assets of the government of the Republic of Romania. But you have a really poor country because there's nothing else left there. So I obviously I was very young when all that happened, but think about it as a wild, wild west. Like people do whatever they want to do. They can flip things. They can, a lot of money was made during that times. But also the general population, right? 20 something million. I don't know what was the population back then, but today we're like 20 something million Romanians. Most of them were still like on very, very low salaries, trying to find means to an end. So what happened is you have a lot of commerce starting to happen between Romania and the neighboring countries. So what was a very normal job back then was going, cross border to Hungary, then Austria, Germany, buy different things and come back and resell them for a profit. That was very, very normal. However, you ask me, why was it that computers were not a thing? Well, first of all, to cross the border, you would have to pay a bribe. You can't just come in with like a truck of computers and be like, hey, we're gonna sell these babies. Like, no, you'd probably have to pay the amount or a lion's share of the amount to the border control. I don't know how to call, like the border person. And it was just a given. Like that's what you would do. So anything that would enter Romania, not only you have to go, right, travel, find it in another country. When you enter the country, you already have a tax that you have to pay.
And to be clear, this is not necessarily an official tax. This was more of a bribe. Hey, let me get through with my products, or both, whichever one was.
Yeah, yeah. Like I remember at some point my parents were telling me we had a good family friend that he was one of the heads of the police or some sort of a local official that was pretty high up in the ranks. And my parents with him went somewhere, again, Hungary or somewhere outside of the country to buy some stuff. But we're talking about small things. We're talking about like produce, juices, like just like nothing big, just like small things, right? You would like go and make like the grocery shopping, but you would probably buy like a truck full of those, or like a not even a truck, but like a car full of those. So as they were coming in, the border person, they're like, "Hey, where's my cut?" They didn't even say anything. They're like, "Where's my cut?" And then this official that were together with my parents in the car is like, "What cut?" So it's like, anyway, long story short, that person got in trouble because lo and behold, in that car was actually someone working with the police, which was like, "Hey, what are you doing here? Why are you asking for money?" So, but again, that was just the norm. Like you didn't even like, it wasn't even like a taboo thing. It's just like, you're at the border, you have to pay. Now, that's not all. You'd have miles and miles of, like long lines of vehicles waiting, right? So you'd go out and you spend coming back, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours waiting just to get back in the country. So a computer was a very exotic thing. Let me put it this way. Like, you can't, it also was a big, it was like a big, like a big object. It's not something small that you can just throw in the back seat. So that's the reason why it was not something common to have a computer back then. So I still don't know how did we end up. I think it was through some sort of relative that we got it through. But that's how things were. Like, you get it through a relative or through a friend. But I remember that.
It's so interesting. I'm sure this does not even compute for Americans, but back then, I was born in Romania as well. You could have the money to buy something, and that wasn't the thing that prevented you from getting access to that thing you wanted to buy. It's like, oh, I could pay for this, but I just can't get it, or I have to like bribe so many people in order to actually get it in my hands. And so the roadblock was more like logistical supply chain than it really was about from a pricing perspective.
Yeah. And it was also the fact that you don't have an ecosystem, right? So because you need, you're buying a computer, but then you need all the ancillary objects, like things like the RAM, you need a monitor. All those things were just like sprawling like in the early 90s. And then slowly things started to pick up. And it's like almost like a funny anecdote that I always laugh when I'm thinking about. But we, like, Romania essentially skipped a phase like basically skipped a stage in the internet era. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but right now Romania has one of the fastest internet connections. I think it's in the top 10 in the world, much, much better than in the US, by the way, much better than in most other countries around North America. The reason for that is so we didn't have internet, right? Like, internet is, I think started in like the 80s, like then in like early 90s, picked up in the US. And it was all dial up, if I may be mistaken, but it was a dial up system. So Romania skipped that, and we did have maybe like for a couple of years, but we went straight into fiber cable. It's like that was the technology that we adopted. So most of the neighboring countries and the Western countries were running, or still running, on like older architectures, but because we skipped a few years, we went straight into the cable fiber, and most of Romania has really, really fast internet access because we never had that intermediary period.
I definitely remember that. I was in the US at the time, and going back to Romania, I was like, oh my God, you could just download into whatever it was, songs, movies, videos back in the day when you'd wait forever for that thing to load up, and there it was just instantaneous. And it was yeah, it was really cool to see that. It was also, I remember, it was also the Romania for a while was ahead when it came to cell phones and texting. That was, yeah, there was so many things that were advanced back then.
I
So
didn't know that. Was it Romania like advanced in terms of phones? I just
yeah, like
remember
'cause we didn't do.
Nokia, Siemens, Motorola were like coming up in like early 2000s. I wasn't aware like the global. Obviously, I was a kid back then.
Yeah, yeah, like the whole Nokia phones were not really that big in the US, at least like relative to Europe. And we went, I remember, like, my first phone was like the Motorola Razr,
Yeah.
and then, yeah, obviously, like, the few years later iPhone came out, and that really changed everything. But for a while, they definitely, yeah, like, my Romanian friends had much better phones. They even had phones, and I didn't, and the whole like texting thing, like, everything was much more advanced for a while.
That's so interesting.
No.
I know that in Romania, BlackBerry was never a big thing. I I had no friends that were on BlackBerry. Everyone was using Nokia, and then iPhone came out, and like 2 years later, most people were like towards leaning towards an iPhone, and then the rest is history.
No. So, okay, take us back. You said you were 10 years old. You wanted to get your own computer. How did you?
Right. I have this. So imagine I have this, like I'm spending time at the computer, but it's obviously family's computer. It's an asset that's shared between a different team, between different family members. And so I want my own thing. I'm like, hey, I want to, at that time I was very interested into video games, music production, which we may briefly touch upon. But I wanted my own thing. And like a laptop, I remember like a one of those devices was really, really expensive for, I don't know, it was the equivalent of like $200, which was crazy, crazy expensive. It was like basically it's like a month or 2 months worth of like roughly 1.5 months of work. So there was no way that I could get one of those. So I said to myself, well, kind of like growing up during that time, I started to shape my personality and I started to realize that if I want something, it's gonna be myself that I have to get it. Growing up there without a lot of possibilities, you see the only possibility being yourself. So that's a good thing. I think like that kind of grid really helps shape who you are later in life. At that point, I was like, hey, I want to find ways to buy a laptop, to buy that piece of. I remember that it was a green, like a small mini laptop. What I did, I started to flip different technology gadgets that were available back then. So we're talking about PlayStations, PSPs. So I was really good at finding niche, or like not even niche things, but I was good at finding great deals on different places and arbitrage and going get on a think about eBay kind of marketplace and resell them for a little bit of a profit. So I started that. I was like maybe 12 when I started doing that. That was my first interaction with e-commerce. Of course, I didn't know that word. I was just buying things and selling things. And I did buy after a few months, I was able to buy a laptop, and that was like just shocked. Like the fact that I had my own thing and I could just install whatever I wanted. There's like no gatekeeping. I could just do whatever I want with that computer. Was and I still remember that day. Like I was so happy. And then from there, I did that for a little bit of. I did the whole like arbitraging as I was. Maybe I did it for like a year, but then something happened. We're like in again early 2000s Romania. We do cash on delivery. There's no payment. There's no like online payments at that. Everything is cash on delivery. So you basically you sell something or you buy something, and someone sends you a package. You pay to the delivery person, and then that's the way things run. So I was doing that, and it was working up until I remember a day that the package comes in. I bought a phone. I found a phone that I wanted to flip, and the phone comes in, and the box is really light. I'm like, maybe something's missing here. Because like I was sniffing something, like, what's going on here? I open up the box and it's like it was a Motorola phone actually. I remember it was like a red Motorola phone. And I'm trying to like it was like one of those like sliding ones. I was like, hey, what's going on here? And mock. It was like a mock phone. And that was the equivalent of like $200, maybe $250, which for me at that time were like it was a lot of money. So I was like, whoa, I did not expect that. I went to the police and it took a while, but the person who was, the clerk was like so stupid that they actually used their real address. So the police, the only thing they need to do is just go and knock at their door. And the guy, I think he went to jail or something later on. But that was the time
So
that we were,
what was that guy's scam? He would pretend to sell real phones, but
yeah,
would
like he
ship.
was on this, yeah, he was on different communities and he's like, hey, I have a phone. Here's some images. And of course, there were like images of real phones, but, he had no real phones. And so what happens is you pay, right? So it's like cash on delivery. So you pay $200. The post person or the courier takes the money and returns the money to the person. But because it was cash, he was so stupid that basically we knew who he was. So I went to the police and I think it took him like a week. And, I got back like, hey, here's your guy, right? And
Did
yeah,
you get
they
your
go,
money back?
I don't think I got my money back. No, I think I never got the money back. But I think he went to jail or he was like he was in sort of some sort of trouble afterwards. I don't know the extent of that problem, but so that was the reality of business in Romania. Like, great, you have a great idea, things are moving, but there's the unknown, and that's one example of growing up in a post-communist country, early 2000s. Is there's not a lot of opportunities, and those who see those opportunities are sometimes bad actors. But that also kind of teach me to always always be a little bit more paranoid that maybe my peers, maybe others in business. I'm like always like looking behind my shoulder because I know that I need to be a little more careful than I maybe I need to. And that's obviously a feature and a bug. But that's my story of me starting to play with e-commerce and understand how you can find things online and then go out and sell them for a profit, which I left that job, I left that gig for a few years. As I had my newly purchased laptop, I was so weirdly interested into creating music. I love playing games, video games. I grew up playing video games. But for whatever reason, I don't know why or how, I got into producing music, and I downloaded a few music production softwares, like they're called digital audio workspaces, DAWs. And I just found myself really, really into the art of creating music. We're talking about like electronic music, like hip hop, that kind of music. And then I did that for many, many years, actually. I did that for, I would say, 6 years, just creating music in my bedroom. Was my thing. And I think it was some sort of also like an escape mechanism, because there's pressure to deliver at school. There's all these things. So I was like, hey, that was the way I could find my creativity. So I
Were you
did that.
ever
Yeah.
either making money off of the music? Were you performing in front of people, or was it just for your own hobby?
Yeah. Well, not many people know, but I did perform at a few festivals in Romania. I was actually DJing for a while,
Oh, nice.
which was pretty cool. I remember, I must have been 18 at that time. And yeah, even then, I remember I was playing at the festival, and I was like the new person, like the new DJ. And there was a person who was like the famous DJ, I would say, and they were so aggressive towards me. I don't remember why, but I just remember they didn't like me there. And they kind of like try to stage me and like do some weird stuff with the crowd. And we're talking about like a festival, like, I don't know, 10,000 people maybe. And I was doing it for the first time. And
Wow.
then there's this person like, no, you're not gonna play. You're only gonna play, like early morning when everyone is like tired and stuff like that. So again, what it's you have these, these like weird moments growing up, because you don't know why are people so like that, right? You don't know. I grew up in a normal family, but then you see all these like kind of moments, and then you realize that all these things, they'll go actually way back in the past, and all you're seeing is an interface of a person who's frustrated on a few things. But anyways, I'm digressing. I did play a few like festivals, and it was pretty fun.
What was that like to get in front of so many people at a young age, especially when you're also getting hate from the other DJs that are performing later?
It was exhilarating. It was really fun. I liked the idea of communicating with people. And for me, I remember that time DJing was an art of communication. It was like the art of movement, right? You have a group of people in front of you that they're there to have fun and enjoy that night or day, whatever, whenever that, music event happens. And for me, I was in many ways doing what I'm doing today, is trying to understand my audience. I was trying to understand, like, who are they and why are they, what kind of vibe, what kind of uh let's say what kind of vibe would I want to share with them. So it's really about being empathic with the audience when you're DJing. I feel like DJing is, in many ways, it's easy to learn the skills. Like, anyone can go on YouTube. You actually have one of these like small DJ turntables, right? You have one of these, and like the technical skill of DJing, it's really easy. I feel like anyone can learn it in a weekend, but actually, like, putting together the pieces, like, and like, who's the audience, who are you playing, who are you going to play before and who's going to come after. And then also there's that unknown part, which is there's so much you can plan ahead, but you also have to be spontaneous in the moment. So I got a lot of interesting insights by like playing with the crowd, playing with, for the crowds back then, which I still think at some point in time I'll do it again. I did it for my birthday this year in a very small setup, very small group, and it was always a delight.
That's were you aware of what you just described back then? Were you aware that you were trying to prepare things and react to the audience, or was it something that came naturally to you? And as you got older, looking back at it, it's like, oh, this is what I was actually doing.
There's certain things that were for sure intuitively coming to me. So there's like intuition about the fact that I want to understand who's the audience and how to connect with them. There was no playbook. There was, at that point, it was nothing that I wasn't necessarily planning for that, but at the same time, I was planning. Like, my mind knew that, if you're gonna go there, you have to put up a good show. And what does a good show mean? Is knowing who they are, knowing what kind of music they're gonna jam into, knowing how to dial in what music I was playing was very important. Otherwise, you just go there as a DJ. And of course, I'm not a renowned DJ, so it's not like people already there's basically zero expectations. Where when you're a no name, there's like zero expectations. So you just have to put a lot more work. If you're a famous DJ, probably it's very, very different because people know who you are and people you can play almost anything, they're gonna enjoy their evening. So I guess this was primarily intuition. And now that I look back and I talk about this, it is also what I'm trying to do when even today with Siena, when I'm talking to the team, I'm trying to put myself as much as I can in their shoes and trying to understand if I share a message, how is that message, who is the audience? Is it going to land well? And it's purely a form of communication. It's just that it's not written or it's not verbal, but it's just more physical with playing music for a group of people.
Yeah, I think this stuff is very fascinating about how the lessons that you learn at different points in your life in unrelated fields that end up translating to what you do later on in your career. And I think that this is a fascinating point about understanding your audience and going outside of your comfort zone, putting yourself out there in front of all these people who are looking at you. And there's risks if you don't do well, right? It's awkward. You know, for most people, this is stuff that nightmares are made of. Is you're in front of a large crowd and things go poorly. Well, to be able to experience that as a kid and think through how can I decrease my chances of failure, increase my chances that these people are going to enjoy what I'm doing, I think is it must have been a pretty powerful lesson to learn at that age.
Yeah, for whatever reason, I was never scared of that. You have these like butterflies and you're like excited, but I was never. I think for most of my life, I'm a very optimistic person. In even like in the darkest moments where I feel like, man, what's going on? Like things are not great. There's that serenity, I guess, of knowing that things will be okay. Again, I remember that those days when I was playing, and it was never like, oh, what if it's gonna, what if the crowd is gonna throw tomatoes at me? It's like, so what? No one will die. It's gonna be just fine. We keep on going.
Yeah. You mentioned the getting into that argument with the other more famous DJ, and you talked about the operating system that he was bringing to the table there and all his experiences that led to that moment, which obviously had very little, if like nothing to do with you and more about what he was going through. Talk about your operating system and your parents and what you just said now about having confidence and feeling secure in these sort of new environments. What do you think was the role of your family and your upbringing and getting it to that point?
Well, as humans, most of us are the artifact of our parents, of our past and upbringing. So a lot of who we are today, just by purely behavioral therapy, you can go back and say whatever you think, whatever you are, the stories that you tell us, probably go back in your early childhood, or like up into your teens. So a lot of I've been doing obviously introspection and understanding my thought patterns and so on. So a lot of them, yeah, do go back in time. I was fortunate enough to grow in a family that was it is a very still very honest family that I deeply love, that is appreciative of the simple things. We never had much. Like we always had enough, so we're happy, but we never had more than enough. We never had surplus. We were never like in like lavish environments or anything like that. So I think it was just the right environment to grow in, because if you had, I have colleagues of mine, high school, high school peers of mine that had more than enough. And I feel like that comfort when you're growing up, especially back then when you don't have as many data points as you have today about how to raise kids. So it was more organic. Again, I'm digressing, but it really helped me the way the whole family setup was happening back then. And the lesson was always that you have to earn your stripe. I remember almost anything that I was doing, like, you have to do better, you have to earn your stripe. And I was also growing up, I was playing professional soccer. I mean, professional as for a kid. I was part of a soccer group, and I wanted to be the number one. I wanted to be the best. And that's something, when you grow up, you have a very competitive environment like soccer. Even I mean, maybe but in Eastern Europe, or at least in Romania, the high school environment is very, very competitive. I don't know how it is here in the US, but in Romania, if you're not getting like A plus, in Romania, it's like a scale of 1 to 10. It's not like A, B, C, D, E. But if you're not getting tens, which is A plus, you're not good enough. So you have these kind of like forcing functions that are in the back of your head, creating I don't know how to call it, but it just creates this this general feeling that you just have to push in order to do better. And of course, a lot of it is just not real. It's just manufactured by the environment. But for an entrepreneur, it is it can be a fuel. It can be a fuel to do better, to stay to stay on your feet and never be complacent. But it took me, and obviously I'm still working through these things. At some point, at points in time, it can feel like if that overrides, right? So if that desire to be the best, to be the, to grow, to like always improve overrides your well-being, it can be daunting, right? So that's when you get burnout, you're not happy with anything because you always chase the next thing. So over time, really starting to wield, you have to wield your mind. Otherwise the mind wields you. But yeah, it all starts with those early childhood moments, and then like how you were growing up. And yeah, to sum up, I think I was fortunate to have one of the best childhoods that I could ask, with with the good and the bad, of course.
And speaking about education in Romania, you're forced to specialize pretty early on. Did you know you wanted to be an entrepreneur, or what did you end up doing in school to prepare you for what you're doing now?
I learned the word entrepreneur. The first time I heard the word entrepreneur, I must have been in ninth or 10th grade. I studied in my high school, I studied economics and business. That's when I heard the word entrepreneur. Up until that point, I had no idea what it was. And it took me a little bit of time to realize, what is this entrepreneur? What does it do? It was like very abstract to me. Like, what, you mean like a business person? You mean like, what is it this person, doing? So I was already basically an entrepreneur when I started selling things, when I started like, doing the arbitrage, when I was, this is again part of different stories for different times, but I was doing homework for other peers, for other classmates, and I was making money because I was hustling harder and I was making their homework and stuff like that. So I was, I guess, an entrepreneur. I had an entrepreneurial mindset since early on, but I found out about the word entrepreneur and what it entails, what does it do on. It took me like I was like late in my teens when I realized that I like that's the only way I could achieve my goals, and my goals were very clear. I started to clarify my goals right around the time that I started doing this like arbitraging business, and I knew that I want to gain financial independence. There was again no, if you're a kid, you can do the most basic math back then and say the average salary at that time in the country is, let's say, $300 per month. That's the average, which I think it was less, but let's take it 300. And I wanted to buy, a laptop, and I wanted to like outfit a studio of like a music studio. Already, like that's going to be a year worth of salary, right? Like on an average basis. So you just do very simple math, and you're like, no, like the only way is really going to be carving my own path and becoming an entrepreneur. Decision was, I think, pretty easy to make. What was more challenging, and I remember in high school thinking like, what exactly am I going to do? Like, because you don't have a lot of models. You don't grow up and see people with like legitimate businesses. Because again, think about very few businesses were sprawling out of the 90s, and those are, most of them are just like pray and spray businesses because they're not like legitimate businesses that sustained over time. Desire, and I was on the computer most of my time, and I knew that there's a world where things are happening. I had no idea about Silicon Valley back in my like early teens, but I knew that there's a world out there where things are happening, and I felt this desire to be a part of that world. I just remember those thoughts of like, hey, I'm pretty sure there's more than my hometown. I'm pretty sure about that. So how can I be part of that?
Yeah, I think it's important to just emphasize a little bit what you said about this wasn't that long ago when the average salary in Romania was $300 a month. That's $3,600 a year. It's an insanely low number for an American audience to comprehend. And especially talking to someone like, look at, I guess both of us, we grew up in that environment, and on screen, like we don't look like we came from a place where the average salary was, $3,600 a year. It's like legit poverty. And that's what it was. And it's not like, computers were cheaper in Romania back then. It was actually more expensive. So that
Yeah.
money didn't go nearly as far as it could go here, especially when it comes to technology. So it was yeah, that's pretty incredible to think about that context, and then look at what's changed since then and what you've been able to accomplish since then. So I think that's pretty cool. So okay, take us through the next phase. Like, what was your did you ever have an actual day job, or did you go straight into being an entrepreneur?
Well, I had a lot of gigs, many gigs, more than I can count on all my fingers. I guess I did have a day job at some point. I was a software engineer for, I would say, 6 months.
Okay.
I was in college. So I was in college. I was studying computer science, and I was coding during the like after the classes. So yeah, that was my official, I guess my only official day job. I did have summer jobs. I came here in the US with like student exchange with like summer job programs back again when I was in college. Yeah, back in college. Those are technically also day jobs, but they were just like for the summer.
What kind of jobs were they?
I was working in hospitality. So I was working at the really great resort in Cape May. And that's actually how a lot of what I'm doing today ties back to those days because I learned the power of great customer service. And I knew nothing about customer service. And I'm gonna like kind of skip a few steps here. Again, Eastern Europe and Europe in general, it's not known for customer service. It's one of those words that we like. I learned very late in my life what customer service is. We
It's
don't
e-
grow up, knowing like what customer service is.
it's even
You
more
don't talk about
unusual
it.
than what an entrepreneur is. Like, what?
Percent,
Be
yeah,
nice to a customer? Why?
yeah,
Yeah.
like exactly. You go somewhere, people, even today, you can go in many places, even at restaurants, and you're not gonna get the same level of quality of treatment as you get here in the US or more warmer environments where like, South America or like Spain where people are naturally just warm, but it's getting better. In any case, I had no idea what customer service was yet. I'm trying to remember how that happened, but I was the only Romanian that was selected to work during that summer in that job. So, and there was like hundreds of people that would apply, maybe even like thousands. I was selected. I think they liked me and I had very good jokes back then. No, I didn't. That's but anyways, I got that job and I was working on the beach 5 or 6 days a week for that summer. And I was interacting with customers every single day. That was my job. I was there to do whatever it was needed to make their stay on the beach better. But what I quickly realized is the better the service I provide, the more tips I would make. And I was like, wow, okay, that's actually not that complicated, right? You just be nice, ask genuine questions about who they are, what they like to do, why are they here? Again, just intuition. It was nothing that I was reading books about this. I was like 20 at that time. And I remember I was making incredibly I was paid incredibly well because of that. And I did that for the summer. And that's when I realized that this is such a different culture. US, it's such a different culture from Romania. And I went back to Romania and I was trying to explain this to my friends, to my family. No, I couldn't do it because it's, you have to spend a little bit of time here to understand the subtle differences, like when, how people show up, how people think being tipped $100 for 10 minutes worth of work was insane. I was like, that is like, your mind cannot compute these things. Like, what are you talking? Like, I just got $100 for taking this chair and putting it like, you know, 20 feet, 20 feet further. And then, still you realize that generosity, it's kind of like an innate thing for many Americans, which is great. And then like, being polite and great customer service, they're all part of the US culture, which I deeply started to admire. So that entire entrepreneurship, that fuel, I mean, I started to get even more fuel now and I understand, oh, this is how things really happen. So that was also a kind of like a defining moment to understand how to just like carry myself through the world by seeing what I've seen back then.
You know what I've had a hard time understanding is that it's totally true. Like, I go in Romania at a restaurant, or you just even walk into the store and nobody smiles. Like, smiling is not something that as person, like a salesperson, does naturally. And yeah, I hear you're so used to people like greeting with a warm smile, but at the same time, Romanians and a bunch of those cultures are extremely hospitable, like much more hospitable than Americans. Like, you go into their houses and it's like a completely different person. Like, that salesperson you're interacting with in a store versus if they somehow like invite you over for dinner. And by the way, like, those invitations are not hard to get. Like, especially if you're traveling or whatever, you're a tourist. Oh, come on over, I'll feed you. and then it couldn't be nicer and it couldn't be happier and the jokes and all these things. And so I don't know, I've always found like really interesting how that, like, why doesn't that translate into customer service when we are extremely hospitable people?
Well, that's a good question. And I totally agree with that. If you spend, spend a Christmas, spend an Easter, spend a holiday, 1st of May, which is Romania's barbecue day, right? Spend some time with any family in Romania. And that's true. Exactly what you said. That's 100% true. People are really, really nice. They're even nicer if you're a foreigner. If you're an American visiting, probably you're going to have even a better treatment that a random person off the street will have. So I totally agree with that. I don't know the answer. I think there's a lot of social, like social dynamic. I don't know exactly the extent of why that's the case, but I agree. Like in private, I feel like Romanians are generally nice people, like generally good people. And most Romanians have grown to have really strong value systems. Most, not all of them, as within, it's hard, it's easy to generalize, but I don't want to do that. I just think that, you have like, especially, folks of my generation, you're growing up like, hey, you just have to do the work. You have to put the work in if you want to like get something out of this. Um, it was probably different from, like the generations that grew up in like communism. I guess the value system was a bit different. You're a little bit more like, reserved as far as what you can do because you grow up and, there's almost nothing you can do outside of the norms. You just do whatever everyone else is doing. But there's a lot of things, and it's interesting when you look back in history and you think that, well, it was just like a communism. It's like it's like a current. It's something that happened, but in fact, it actually completely changed the way a country, or even actually it's a group of countries, because it wasn't just Romania, but it was a group of countries that were the whole I'd say future was altered because of the way communism kind of like cling to those Eastern European countries, and that actually changed the mentality of the people. It created scarcity, created a different kind of mindset. So that's like an interesting observation versus a culture like here where it's a culture of abundance. Anyone has a chance to build something great. Anyone has like the power and the confidence to do it. And then you see it also how people show up here in the US. You go almost anywhere. People are like, smiling, as you said, they're like very confident when you talk to them. And you go somewhere in Europe, and I think it's not just Romania, but it's more broadly in Europe. People are a lot more reserved. They're more, not necessarily shy, but more reserved. They're smiling less because, like, obviously the historical past that we have and all the wars and people, you know, you carry on this like generational trauma, right? You carry on, generation by generation, and it's different.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about the point you're making about communism, and I wonder if it also has something to do with ownership and private property. Like you have much more accountability when it comes to things that you own because like this is your house. It's the same thing. I'm not gonna like I'm less likely to litter in my house than I am to litter on the street because like this is my house and I take pride in it. It's mine. And if you grew up in an era where like you didn't own anything. Like this store is not your store. It's a government store. Like
Yeah.
you're like, it's like this attitude, like, oh, I need to take things from my boss and like give them to me versus like, oh, we're all in this together. Even if I'm just an employee, like I need to feel accountable. I have some responsibility and I feel some sense of ownership towards what it is that I'm doing. And if like that sense of ownership in some of these cultures did not extend beyond the house, then like anything else, it's like almost like you're out there and you're there to like steal and grab things for yourself and like shove the next guy over. Uh,
Yeah.
but again, but that doesn't translate within your own environment because then it's like, oh no, this is mine, and like I don't want my kids to act that way in my house because like we're all like trying to turn this into a better thing. And so, yeah, I think it is an important thing to understand a business culture as a function of politics, history, and like you said, like all these traumas that people come pre-programmed with.
One of the most profound lessons that I learned in the recent years, we're talking about the last year or so. So I was fortunate enough to get the chance to build a company that's global. We have amazing team members all across the world, many different time zones. That's a story how we ended up building a majority of remote team. We have a few folks in New York City, but we have folks from all over the world, from Europe to South America, US. We have team members in Africa. It's a beautiful team that we've built. What I started to appreciate is the challenge that comes with understanding culture. And when it comes specifically when it comes to business culture, it's one of those things. There's like the word entrepreneur. I heard it was a few years after starting my first startup, the word culture, like how do we build culture? And I was like so confused. I was like, what is this thing? It's like this thing where you like put on your wall and like, integrity and honesty, like the typical value systems that you see in, like very corny, uh, posters. So I thought that was culture. I thought like, oh, cool. It's just, I'm going to write down, 10 things that I think are important or that I see others do. And like, sure, that's our culture. That's what we are. That's what we believe in. That was me, many, many years ago. And I still was trying to decipher this idea of like, what is a business culture? Like when you want to build a culture, what is it? I had no, again, this was also before ChatGPT. Like I was reading, I was like trying to talk to mentors and trying to talk to people, but I couldn't physically like understand what exactly culture and how to influence it ultimately. Like, how do you shape it? And so the more I traveled the world and the more I spent time with folks from different cultures, I actually start to understand the meaning of culture. And culture is actually one of the primary forcing functions for how we operate as humans. And culture for me is the set of values that you use every day. Like when you wake up, you have your own microculture as an individual. You've kind of built yourself as an individual and you have a set of values. Do you know or have you mapped them out and like be intentional about it? Maybe or maybe not. But that's what we are. We're all a set of we're all a set of values. And why I'm so excited and passionate about the idea of culture is because you get to see how culture is shaped differently for different people from like all over the world. So what I value or how I view the world, and truly this is like physically like how I view the world is different than how someone else from another part of the world sees it. Truly, this we're talking about like at the synapse level. I'm viewing the world differently than another person, and it is humbling and it creates deep empathy. I mean, over time, you get to develop empathy with other cultures and other people, and even today I have friends, I have Arab friends, I have Israeli friends, and as there's a war happening out there, and I I I kind of like see the both, I see the both like both I see both point of views because I was fortunate enough to spend time with both kind of cultures. It really is, I would say, one of the best things to do, or one of the best things you can do, is try to spend as much time with the like diverse group of people. There's nothing that opens up the world and the brain as just spending time with different cultures. Because ultimately, if you grow up in just one culture with one kind of group of people, everything is that thing. That's the world. When you think about what's the world, it's that your group of people, your group of friends, your family. And then you watch the news or you see something and you start judging, like, oh yeah, like that's messed up. Like, what's happening there or whatever. But the more you spend time with other cultures, all of a sudden, like things start to click. And then you can have a different conversation. So
Yeah, and I think
that
it's also interesting to you become aware that you are also part of a culture that is equally idiosyncratic and weird to other people, but to you, you don't even know. And it's like the thing about two fish swimming in the ocean, and an old fish swims by them and is like, "Hey boys, how's the water?" And the fish swim by and they ask each other like, "What's water?"
I didn't know that.
That's the thing, right? Like if you're just in it, you've been in it the whole time, you don't realize that, hey, like this is my culture. And once you get exposed to something else, all of a sudden you start seeing differences in how you've been doing things or you've been raised to do things. Like, oh, holy shit, like this is just as weird and beautiful as the other culture that I've been watching on TV, and it seems so exotic to me. Like mine is equally exotic to them, and so it's yeah, it's an interesting observation. How do you think about like culture from a company perspective and taking all of these like this diversity of your team, but then trying to find one cohesive culture to apply your values and make sure everyone's operating in the way that you'd want the entire company to operate?
It continues to be one of my greatest challenges is building the culture. I don't know if this ever stops as the company grows. It even becomes more important to cement the culture, communicate what 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 the culture is, how you actually manifest the culture. And so I'm still learning. I'm still like thinking through like the best way to scale that. Ultimately, it's a combination, or for us, we've found out that it's a combination of systems that you have to put in place, especially when most of the team is distributed. We do meet some of us in person, and we're lucky to get to spend time together. However, most companies today are distributed. Even if you're meeting just two days out of a week in person, they're still basically most of the time distributed. So there's still so much of the work that's happening outside of the physical location, like the physical space. Again, for companies, for most technology companies. So it's important to find systems to create that culture. Right now, we're at the stage where we're lucky enough not to be not to be big enough so things are out of control. I'm still very much in touch with a lot of our team, with most of our team. I'm talking on a daily, weekly basis. So I'm trying to influence in different ways. I'll quote my coach is, as CEO, you're always the chief behavior officer. And that's the good news and the bad news, because you have to, if you really believe that, if you really want your culture to thrive, you have to embody that culture. If the value, for example, is curiosity, which is for Siena, then I have to show up every week and show, kind of like, put curiosity forward. And what does that mean? I keep everyone in the loop with the latest, that because I'm constantly like learning new things. I'm technically spamming my team at this point with like, here's what's going on. Here's what, this new company just launched. Here's this new technology that came out. And hopefully others see that, and then you create a flywheel over time. But of course, that's not, culture is not distributed equally. You'll have a group of people that are going to be more closer to the source, right? More closer to what you envision as a culture. And then you have groups of people that are going to be more distant. And my role, I view myself as trying to coordinate and try to foster the culture. And it's by far, it's one of the hardest jobs to do, because there's no, well, tracking culture is really hard. It's easy to say, we want to reach this milestone, and this milestone equals this number. It's a KPI. When it comes to culture, sure. I mean, I'm sure you can systematize it through metrics and KPIs, but in reality, you just see it. You just see it in like in day-to-day interactions. So yeah, we're still learning there, but there's many things. I tend to believe more and more that anything that's worth doing, you have to put a system in place, even if it's the entirely manual system where once a day or once a week you do something, and then that thing kind of like spawns out other things. I think you have to do it. Otherwise, if you just leave it like, oh, by the way, what I realized, and it was not a shock, but also kind of a moment of reflection, every company has a culture, whether you define it or not, formed in some way. And that is basically the set of principles and the way people act if no one is in the room. And if I leave the company for 12 months and come back, the culture is what happens when I'm not there. That's why it's so hard, because you constantly have to put in place systems to make sure that the culture thrives. But we're still early on in the process, and I'm learning. And I have a great leadership team that keeps me accountable, and we always discuss ways of improving this.
Yeah. No, I think that's a key point too, is like having other people point out where you're doing well and not so well, and holding you accountable to get better. But take us back to how you ended up I guess like ultimately starting Sienna, but even before that, what was your entrepreneurship journey that got you there?
Yeah, I don't know how much time we got, but I'll try to share the just a few key moments. So
And by the way, like we can set up another time to dive deeper
sure,
into Sienna, because I know we have more. So yeah, maybe even
yeah,
we'll
I'm happy
build a
to do
little
it.
cliffhanger at the end, and we'll do part two later.
So I spent that summer in the US, set some money aside. My goal was to save up some amount of money. I set up some goals for myself, and I completely exceeded any expectations. So I had a little bit of cash. Going back, I started a series of businesses, local
Do you remember
businesses.
how much money you were planning on saving? Like, what was this? Yeah.
10K.
Okay.
It was about 10K,
And
and
you got
I
there.
saved a lot more than that. Yeah, yeah, it was
Okay.
a lot more than that.
Wow.
That 10K was my number, because I was doing the math, and I was like, hey, if I can like save up like, about 3.5K a month, and it's like 3 months, so I like roughly 10K. But then I mean, I actually had to make more than 3.5K, because I had to pay for the flight. I had to pay for like other things. Like the program actually costed me, I don't know, $2,000 to be there or something. But I did the math, and it was about 10K. But I was lucky enough to completely.
What would you end up making that summer?
It's hard to tell, and I may be telling the biggest lie, but maybe it was like 30K,
Wow.
20K, 20 to
Yeah.
30K. Yeah, the biggest day was the 4th of July. I still have a picture with like a stack of money. I was like, this is insane. This is the most money I've ever seen in my life. Like, it was like 4th of July. And I was like, God bless America. I was like, this is incredible.
No, I think this stuff is amazing, right? Because you do these side hustles, especially hearing that you have to pay to get an opportunity to do this, and then you end up making the money, saving the money, and you, I'm assuming, use that to like fund yourself in the next thing that
Yeah.
you're planning on doing, which is yeah, like VC, the old school way, where you can't rely on other people. You just have to go out there, earn some money, save it, and use that.
Yeah, it was HC, hustle capital, I guess.
I love it.
I would coin that term. So I got back roughly with that amount in my hands, and I said, okay, cool. Now I have something to work with. I knew that I have something to work with. Um,
What year was this? When was this?
this was 2013 when I was
Okay.
so yeah, 12 years ago. I got back and then I always had a lot of ideas around stuff to build. I was always pattern matching and seeing things that are like, oh, this is a good opportunity. I could be doing this and I could be buying that. Like this comes back from those early days of me spotting different opportunities online on the internet. So I started, small local businesses, like everything was online, like, buying things, selling things, but this was like a more of a legitimate business. I went back. I started a few things. None of them worked out as I mean to the extent that I wanted to, like an actual sustainable business. And then the next year, I went back again because I lost almost all the money because I invested in like random projects.
So yeah, what were some of these projects that didn't end up working out?
Man, it's like so many of them. Some of them almost no one knows about them. They're like my friends and myself are the only one that know about them. Like I had like at some point in time, and I never said this before, I had like an automotive business. And
Wow, that is a very impressive business to start up.
yeah, I was doing that at the same time I was doing online selling. So I was doing like a lot of different like side hustles all at the same time. And that was actually quite fun. That I love cars, and I found this product that I was buying it from the US, where you can like spray cars with a substance, and then it becomes like a foil, like a like a wrap. And that was a very novel thing, and I was fascinated by that technology. And it was fun times, but that was I wouldn't say I just lost money on that gig. Let me put it this way, I lost money on that gig, and that's when I made a promise to myself that I want to build scalable business. I don't want to build something that's gonna keep me keep me tied, keep my hands tied into something I cannot grow out of. So that happened.
What was the business lesson there? Like, why was it not sustainable?
There were too many moving parts. The margin of error was virtually zero because we were like working with a very novel substance. It was someone else that would have to spray the car, and it was very tedious. The margins were incredibly small. Like the margins were so low. So it's almost like the worst business you can be. Also, if you screwed up something and it, for whatever reason, the result is not where it's supposed to be, you'd be losing money on that gig, on that specific project. So yeah, it was not a sustainable business. However, there was something interesting that I learned, and that was the power of the brand. We had hundreds of thousands of followers in Romania, so we created a huge community around this passion of mine, and I did it with a few friends. It got so big, not financially, not revenue wise, but so big in terms of the brand. We opened up a franchise in Dubai at some point. And I was 21, and I was
What?
flying. Yeah, like no, yeah, it's like a very random story, but yeah, that actually happened.
How did that happen? Did you know somebody in Dubai? Like, how was that?
No, so we were growing this business in Romania, and we were doing like we were attending car meetings, and we were just basically promoting our business. It was like, hey, this is the brand new product we were doing, selling to like auto repair shops. So we're trying to do distribution of this new product that we're importing. And we got so like the brand was so known. I don't know how, but we just got this email one day like, "Hey, we love what you guys are doing back in Romania. Do you want to do it here in Dubai?" I was like, "Of course we want to do it in Dubai." And so I went and I spent there, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks, and we set up shop, and we did Ferraris, we did like all the like luxury cars. It was incredible.
Wow. And still this failed. And this is like a business that nobody knows about. And you guys
Yeah.
were like big in Dubai. This is and big
Yeah.
on social. That is
Yeah, yeah. It's pretty fun.
how do you think about like if you have something like that in the US? I mean, it sounds ripe for venture capital investment. Like, oh, it's not making money, but don't worry. Like you got the followers. Like you got this
Yeah.
a lot of attention. Like we'll figure out how to make this profitable in the future. Do you think there's some version of that? Like if this business had a bunch of capital, you can get it to a point or but I think that your point about like learning these mistakes early, it's like, okay, well, I have to make sure the margins work. Like it is legitimately worse business than the one you're doing now. But, like, is that just a function of a lack of capital, and you just don't have the you can only work so many summer jobs in order to fund
Yeah.
these side projects?
Well, I don't know how this industry played out now, many years later. I'm assuming the business or like at least the product, the technology still works. And I think the manufacturers, right, that's where the most value was being produced, and that's where the easiest value was being produced because there's no risk. If you just manufacture and sell the product, there's no risk. We were both retailing and we were also applying the product, which was a different value creation process. Maybe there's some value in that, but generally, I don't think VCs would have invested in anything like. I don't think if this would have been in the US would have been successful either because it's again it's a high risk, low reward situation. So and it's also very hard to scale. There's again a lot of moving parts. So normally that's not a problem. Like having a lot of moving parts is not a problem. There's many companies that have scaled and they've grown really big because of industries that are highly regulated or there's a lot of moving parts. Actually, those are very interesting problems to solve. But because the value creation was like close to nothing, I just foundationally I just thought it was not a good, like it was just not a good idea. So I had to say no, and I had to, we imagine, building something that people know, and it was like a brand that people love. But we're like, well, it's cool. The brand is cool. I love what we're doing, but it's not real business. We can't just do this. And I made that hard decision, and I remember saying, no, just have to close shop and move on.
That's pretty wise for a 20-year-old to come to that conclusion. That's yeah, that's great. And I think the other thing that's interesting to me about this, and I know you're sort of like glossing over these things, but I think there are a lot of lessons there in terms of trying a lot of things and knowing when to quit. It's a numbers game. It's also about experience, learning from each of these mistakes and getting pretty far with them, right? You're going to Dubai and striking up franchise deals, like understanding the different economics of a business and then having, the balls to say, hey, this isn't like I got to shut this thing down because it's not long term sustainable, even though it makes me feel cool because I'm popular on Instagram or whatever, right?
Yeah,
So I think there's yeah, I think there's a lot to pick up there on trying a bunch of stuff until you figure out the thing that works. But in order to actually have that be successful, you have to know when to move on, but you also have to know like when to be like, oh no, this is worth the effort. I should try to figure out this problem because it's hard, but that doesn't mean I need to quit. And that's a cool place, cool experience to have, especially at a young age.
I agree. It was a lot of fun.
Um, awesome, Andrei. Well, I know we're on out of time on this episode, but would love to continue the conversation. This is a perfect cliffhanger to figure out how you went from having an auto product company with presence in Dubai to creating an AI company in the customer service space and beyond. So it's yeah, it'd be great to continue this.
Yeah, I mean, these are the most adjacent industries ever, right? Like it's right there. You just one jump away, and you get from that to AI. It's just
Exactly.
the story is very simple.
Exactly. Well, yeah, that's the yeah. But that is look, that's the thing, and that's the. I was actually talking to a guy last night at an event, and he's doing. I don't know if it's a podcast, but he's doing these events, in person events, where he talks about. He's calling them chapter two, where it's people's like second chapter in their careers, and it's always like the most random stuff. Like someone who went from like a rock and roll band to now teaching like literature at some college, or these types of stories that seem very incongruous. But the question is like, there's got to be some like linear path between them. Once you tell the story, you can start seeing these pieces. I was like, oh yeah, there are some clues all along that I was interested in some part of this, and all of a sudden everything just clicked and the right formulation came about. So I can't wait to hear how this all came together for Sienna.
Excited to continue.
Cool, thank you.